Hey everyone, we are live on Facebook and we will be kicking it off in just 1 minute.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second in a series of Black Lives Matter panels focusing on uprooting systemic racism through the intersection of schools, health, and justice. We are so happy to have you with us tonight for what we hope will be an informative and an insightful discussion. The goal tonight, and with subsequent panels, will be to elevate our concerns and suggestions into solutions-oriented actions that will help drive the movement forward. That's why we are excited tonight to have a panel of state legislators with us to not only add to the discussion, but to produce actionable solutions. While the discussion will focus on issues, the state party does not legislate. We do not offer any type of legislation or suggestions for legislation. What we do instead is we support candidates that reflect our values, like the legislators that we have on this panel. We are joined tonight by a wonderful group of elected officials, and let me say thank you to all of you for agreeing to be with us tonight. And we hope that you will enjoy your time with us. We are very excited to have you here. They work tirelessly on behalf of all of us. As mentioned before, this is a continuing conversation that we look forward to building upon. So 90 minutes was not enough the last time. It's not enough this time. We will continue this dialogue, and we hope that you will continue to join us as we continue to present these panels for all of you. We hope that you will send us ideas for future guests and for topics moving forward. So let's go over the agenda for tonight. Tonight's agenda will include a discussion with our incredible panelists, who I'll introduce shortly. The discussion will be moderated by State Senator Mary Washington, who was with us the last time, and she did such a great job that we had to have her back again. So thank you, Senator Washington, for being with us. We'll open the discussion up to our audience for some Q&A. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature through Zoom or in the comment section if you're joining us through Facebook Live. So let's get right to our amazing panel, starting with Senator Dolores Kelly. Senator Dolores Kelly was first elected to the legislature as a member of the House of Delegates in 1991. After only one term in the House, she successfully ran for a seat in the state Senate representing Baltimore County. Senator Kelly currently serves as chair of the Senate Finance Committee. She is a life member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, soror of mine, and a past president of the Black Jewish Forum of Baltimore. Senator Kelly has also served as a former secretary of the Maryland Democratic Party and served as the Maryland Electoral College, served on the Maryland Electoral College in 2004 and as its chair in 2008. Welcome, Senator Kelly. Senator Paul Pinsky, so nice to have you with us, was elected to the Maryland Senate in 1994 after 2 terms in the House and currently serves as the chairman of the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. He has helped shape the most major state education and environmental policies in Maryland over the last decade. Senator Pinsky has worked in the field of education for over 40 years as a high school history teacher, teacher advocate, and policy consultant on educator effectiveness. He is also a member of the Kirwan Commission, which was responsible for restructuring state school funding and served as a Sanders delegate in the last election. Senator Will Smith was elected to represent District 20 in the Maryland House of Delegates in 2014. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, he served on the Criminal Justice and Family Law Subcommittee. Along with these roles, Senator Smith was a member of several key work groups, including Justice Reinvestment, Law Enforcement Officers, Bill of Rights, and Death with Dignity. In 2016, Senator Smith was appointed to represent District 20 in the Maryland State Senate, making him the first African-American senator from Montgomery County. In the Senate, he has worked to forge relationships with his colleagues from across the state and political spectrum, which has allowed him to become an effective legislator in Annapolis. In 2019, he became the 50th chairman of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. He is the first African-American to hold that post. As chairman, Senator Smith has championed robust criminal justice reform measures and has led efforts to provide economic and educational opportunities for all Marylanders. Welcome, sir. Delegate Jocelyn Pena-Melnick. So happy to have you here. She has represented my county, Prince George's County and Anne Arundel counties as state delegate for 10 years. She works tirelessly on behalf of her constituents, and a passion for public service is at the core of her character. As a child, she immigrated from the Dominican Republic to the United States with her single mother and sister. Her mom worked in New York's garment industry, often struggling to make ends meet, leading to a time when the family was on welfare because her father did not pay child support. But despite tough circumstances, she succeeded in school and learned English. She was an equal opportunity program scholar and the first in her family to attend college. Her background is reflected every single day in the empathy she shows for the citizens of Maryland and the constituents that she represents. She leads with her heart, and she is beloved in Prince George's County. I can say that from firsthand experience. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Delegate Vanessa Atterbury, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. She was elected to a second term in 2018 in the Maryland General Assembly to represent District 13, Howard County, Maryland. After only having served one term in the Maryland General Assembly, she was appointed by Speaker of the House, Michael Bush, to serve as the Vice Chair of the Judiciary Committee. In addition to serving as Vice Chair, she serves as Chair of the Public Safety Work Group, serves on the Family Law Subcommittee, and was elected for a second time in 2019 to serve as Chair of the Howard County House Delegation. Speaker Adrian Jones appointed her to serve as Chair of the House's Police Reform and Accountability Work Group during the 2020 legislative interim. In the General Assembly, she has been successful in passing legislation to keep guns out of the hands of abusers, strengthening prosecutors' ability to convict sexual predators, increasing circumstances under which a protective order may be granted, and altering how Howard County elects its school board members. Welcome and thank you. Delegate Alonzo Washington. Welcome, sir. Is a state delegate in the Maryland General Assembly representing District 22. He is a lifelong resident of Prince George's County and graduated from the University of Maryland in 2007 with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and criminology. Delegate Washington has been serving in the House of Delegates since 2012. In just a few short years, he has established himself as a leading independent voice in the General Assembly on the issues of education reform, eliminating the school-to-prison pipeline, affordable housing, and law enforcement accountability. He has sponsored numerous pieces of legislation aimed at leveling the scale of justice for Black and Brown communities in Maryland. He currently serves as co-chair of the Prince George's County Police Reform Work Group. Delegate Washington currently holds various leadership roles in the House of Delegates, including as vice chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. He also serves as the chair of the Education Subcommittee and is the first Black person and Prince Georgian to ever hold that position. Welcome, sir. And now to our moderator, State Senator Mary Washington. Dr. Washington earned her PhD in sociology from the Johns Hopkins University, where she began her dedication to fight against structural inequalities based on race, class, or gender, and her keen understanding of the needs of urban communities and other vulnerable populations. She taught sociology at Lehigh University before taking a postdoctoral fellowship at the Population Studies Center at the University of Pennsylvania. She is a trailblazer. She made history in 2010 by becoming the first LGBTQ African American to serve elected to the House of Delegates, and the first African American and woman elected to the Maryland Senate. She made history again in 2012 by passing the nation's first social media privacy protection law. In her nearly 10 years in office, Senator Washington has distinguished herself as a leader fighting for affordable access to water, protecting families at risk of losing their homes by unfair tax sales and foreclosures, reforms and economic justice for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women, making sure public schools get the fair and equitable funding, and helping unaccompanied homeless youth get the services and support they deserve. Senator Washington currently serves as Senator Chair of the Joint Committee on Children, Youth, and Families, and is a member of the part-time faculty of the Maryland Institute College of Art, where she teaches social policy, critical race theory, and applied mathematics. That's a mouthful for everybody. I mean, we have got a heavyweight group of people here tonight. So I'm going to stop talking. I am beyond excited that all of you are here. Thank you so much for joining us. State Senator Washington, I am going to turn this over to you because I am anxious to get this party started. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And again, thank you and I'm honored to be able to host this second in the series. And also thank you for having the idea to bring us together as Democrats to discuss Black Lives Matter and structural racism and how do we undo that as a party and as Marylanders and as individuals. And I'm very excited about this panel because it's an opportunity for us as legislators to talk about these impacts in our communities. We'll just jump right into it. Black Lives Matters, we're focusing on schools, health, and justice today. We're talking about uprooting systemic racism, and it's the second in their series. We are Democratic legislators. We also are legislators and we represent Maryland as a state as well as our local jurisdictions. So first we're going to focus on having some conversation around healthcare, mental health, particularly in the context of COVID. Then we're going to transition into a discussion around education and then criminal justice reform. Again, it's a lot to discuss, lots of questions. We're going to focus on our conversation part. It's going to be about 30-35 minutes. During that time, please post your questions into the chat. Also, you can also post questions on Facebook. That is being monitored by our staff, and those questions are going to be curated and gathered and collected, and we're going to spend the balance of the time asking those questions. In this format, there'll be some questions directed towards specific legislators who are on the committees of jurisdiction, but all legislators are invited and will have an opportunity to comment. Everyone's not going to comment on every single question because obviously we won't be able to get through all the topic areas. So colleagues, I'm just going to ask your forgiveness in the beginning. As the moderator, part of what I'm going to do is sort of jump in and try to move us along so that we can make sure that everyone's engaged and that we get to the questions. So let's just first start with about a minute or so and talking about why you're here. What does the Black Lives Matter movement mean to you? Or what does Black Lives Matters mean to you personally? And also in the context of our state legislature in Maryland. So if we could start with Delegate Atterbury, followed up by Delegate Pena-Melnick.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see my colleagues. And first, I want to thank the party and I want to thank Chair Lewis for having me on the panel. And thank you, Senator Washington, for moderating. For me, those who know my background, I have 3 young children that are 2 boys and a girl. They are 8. One's turning 7 tomorrow, and my daughter is 5. I was pregnant with her when I first got elected. So Black Lives Matter. I'm a Black woman. I'm raising 3 young Black kids. It's not just a movement, it's a way of life, and it's a way that we live every single day. In terms of my personal view on it, you know, these are the things you do when you wake up in the morning or when you're raising children. I'm already worried about my little ones driving. I'm already incredibly engaged in their school when they went to public school starting in kindergarten because I know how little Black boys get treated because I have an older brother and I saw how he was treated. I saw how my father was stopped driving up Route 29 from Montgomery County back home to Howard County and harassed. You know, my brother, I grew up in Clarksville, lovely Howard County, Maryland, was stopped routinely and asked what was he doing in that area. And at one point put face down on the pavement. So these issues, no one is immune to these issues, no matter where you live. And if you are a person of color in today's society, then you think about these things all of the time about your loved ones and about yourselves. So in the context of policy, I'm honored that our speaker, Adrienne Jones, our first African-American and first female speaker of the House, trusted in me and appointed me chair of our House Police and Reform Accountability Work Group, where we can dive into these issues. She had committed last session to actually having a police reform and accountability work group. She sped that timeline up a little bit after the murder of George Floyd. And so there are 13 members on the work group, and we have a very, very specific charge. And our charge is to take a look at body cameras in the state of Maryland and see if we get a uniform policy and in terms of storage and releasing its footage and use. We're taking a look at the use of force. Do we need a statewide policy in terms of the use of force? We are going to take a look at, independent investigations of police misconduct and use of force. So all of these issues to me, it's where personal and policy interconnect. And really we want to be bold and make some changes and move forward in Maryland in that area.
Thank you. A great kickoff. Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Pena-Melnick. And after that, Senator Pinsky.
Thank you and good evening. Thank you for having me. It is really an honor to be with my colleagues who I love all of you. We get along really well. And I think we have the same value system, which is really important. Black Lives Matter for me is really important. It is a call to action for us to finally accept that racism we know exists, but is alive and well. To accept that, as far as for my background, I sit on the health committee, I'm the vice chair of the health committee, that racism is a public health crisis and that it is important for us to realize that and accept it. As a Black Latina, I can tell you that for me, my experiences are a bit different because in some circles, I am not Black enough. In some circles, I'm not Latina enough. And I find myself often in the limbo. And when you talk about the term weathering, I can tell you that I have experienced that, the physical toll on my health, when I have to constantly be proving myself to everyone, when I have to work twice as hard to make sure that I am respected and that I do my work. So these are very trying times, but I really hope and pray to God that we stay active, that we don't drop it, because if we do not seize the moment now and change policies, whether it's health, education, criminal justice, it's never gonna happen. This is the time to do it. And people of color and low-income individuals historically have faced greater barriers to accessing care. I'm here tonight to talk about healthcare and minority disparities. And we know that the Affordable Care Act led to large coverage gains for many groups. In Maryland, we created the health exchange. We also expanded Medicaid. We reduced the number of uninsured by more than 50%. However, as of 2018, most groups of color remained more likely to be uninsured to whites. And that is an issue, and that is a problem.
Absolutely, thank you. Again, what does Black Lives Matter mean to you personally and in the context of the state legislature, Senator Pinsky? And that'll be followed by Delegate Washington.
Thank you. My first teaching job in the state of Maryland was Fairmount Heights High School in Prince George's County. It was one of the two historic Black high schools in the county. I came there to teach history. And over the years I taught there, I found that I learned a hell of a lot more than probably what I taught. And I think that was a very worthwhile experience working and teaching in a predominantly Black community. Look, besides changing personal behaviors, I think combating white supremacy also means taking on the foundations that create and prop up racial division. I think besides jobs and housing, I think education is one of those key components. And I chair the Education, Health, and Environmental Committee, so I think it gives me an opportunity to take that on. And on a personal level, white supremacy, racism affects all of us. And I think white people have an obligation to raise a struggle against racism among other white people. We're all ingrained with it. We're all trying to change it. We have been for years, but it's pretty heavily ingrained. So I'm going to keep working on it and use my position to help work on that. And I'm very honored to be invited on this panel tonight.
All right, thank you, Senator Pinsky. Delegate Washington, and then that'll be followed up by Senator Smith. Delegate Washington, your thoughts? I like saying Delegate Washington. by the way.
Look, I was about to say I like saying Senator Washington. So, but it's a pleasure being here with everyone, and obviously all my colleagues are great people and have been doing great work in the legislature. Ms. Yvette Lewis, thank you for your hard work in the Democratic Party as well. And on behalf of Prince George's, we support you and we're behind you 100% in this fight to get rid of this racist guy in the White House. You know, Black Lives Matter, Black lives have mattered to me since I was born. As a Black man in this country and as a Black man in Maryland, I was raised by a single mother, a Black woman who raised 6 kids on her own. And she worked her butt off to ensure that we had a high quality education and that we made it through the tough times. So when I think about Black lives and when I think about what we need to do, I think about my mother and the struggle that she had to go through every day to make sure she took care of 4 Black boys growing up and two young Black women growing up in this country. And, for me, Black Lives Matter also means that we must eradicate systemic racism throughout our country and throughout the state of Maryland. That matters, and it still exists. And unfortunately, it still exists in Maryland and in Maryland now. And we have to change it. We have to change it, and we have to do something just a little bit different. And finally, I'll say this, that America has not atoned for its sins of slavery and for its sins of so many things that has happened to the Black community. And that's what Black Lives Matter means to me. And they must atone for those sins.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Smith.
Oh, well, thanks, Senator Washington, and thanks, Chair Lewis, and thanks to the party for bringing us all together tonight. If I would say what Black Lives Matter means to me is understanding our history and then having the courage to change kind of our destiny in the future. I know that sounds kind of corny, but I look back at my parents. My dad and my mother were both born in the 30s and the 50s, respectively, and the 40s, respectively. My dad passed away in 2006, and I've been thinking about what our conversations would be like in this moment, because when he was born and he was growing up, Black folks in the South were still being asked how many pieces of soap were in a box to vote. And so we think about the evolution in not only the United States, but in Maryland, the passage of the 15th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act. And then now we're still waiting for the Republican Senate to take action on that piece of legislation, on the renewal of that piece of legislation right now. So we have a lot to do. Delegate Washington's right. We've got a lot to atone for, not only in the United States, but also in Maryland. And I guess my message then is that we've got to look to the examples of people like Matthias D'Souza, Benjamin Banneker, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Everett Waring, Thurgood Marshall, Donald Gaines Murray, Everett Waring, again, to show that we have examples of African Americans excelling and achieving despite what was previously seen to be impossible odds. And so I think their example in history is instructive for us in this moment. And as Delegate Atterbury said, we have a unique political moment now to effectuate some real meaningful change. And it's my hope that we can seize upon this moment and carry it into the General Assembly, whether it's earlier than we think is in January or whenever it is, but whenever we reconvene, that we have the opportunity to seize this political moment to make real change in a wide array of areas. So in June, I sent a letter that outlined some reforms. It wasn't an exhaustive list, but it was some forms that I thought would be necessary to kickstart the legislative process so that folks like Senator Jill Carter and Senator Sidnor can rise up and take the lead on these issues that they've been fighting on for years. So I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. I'm looking forward to our session coming up. And so I really appreciate everyone on the panel for all of your hard work, and thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Smith. And Senator Kelly, again, I always just admire you and just love being on this panel with you and love serving with you. For you, what is Black Lives Matter? And personally, and also connected to us as legislators in the state of Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and to the chair of the Democratic Party for getting us all together this way. Let me just say, I'm the senior member of the Senate, and I'm the senior member of this group, and I've seen more confusion and more discrimination than many of you have years. I have lived it personally, and even as a young woman going to college. I lived in North Virginia, which was very segregated. I remember going to the State Department of Labor looking for a job one summer as I was preparing for college. And I was told the only thing they had, and they said it just like this for a Negro kid, is to inspect eggs on a farm, which was 20 miles away. They didn't want me to have a job. When my sister, a year younger, went the next year looking at the Board of Elections to register, they said to her, we need to know that you can name all of the counties of the state of Virginia, where there were 99 of them. And she said, well, nobody else was asked that. You just ask everybody else in this line, where did they live? And you gave them their card. They said, do you want your registration or not? And so that was it. She went to med school at 19 years old, but she couldn't register and vote at that time in the state of Virginia when she got 21, because she couldn't name the 99 counties in Virginia. When I went to grad school in New York at NYU, I was in a little apartment that was so close to the school I could walk to my classes. And the first Monday that I came home from school, I found a notice from the high constable on the door of the apartment. I was the only person on the ground floor next to the mailboxes. And it said there was a covenant that covered this building and that a person of my hue could not live in that building. So instead of working on my assignments that day, I had to find somewhere else to move. So Black lives have been considered expendable, have been considered cheap, have considered really a labor force. We've always been considered the essential workers, but not the people in charge, not the people with a brain, not those who could energize and manage systems, not those who could bring communities together, not those of value. And so sad to say, it's still that way today, but we do matter. And I wonder about those essential workers during this pandemic who are essentially Black and brown people in America. They are the essential ones. They aren't getting hazard pay. They have to leave their children. So when we think about what should the school system look like when it reopens, whenever it does, you have to wonder, since daycare is shut down and these essential workers can't even afford it, if it were available, will the 9-year-old, instead of getting a lesson with a paper packet, since there isn't high-speed internet in most of the places where Black people live, in Maryland and in the nation, will that child be the babysitter for the toddler? And if we are depressed, staying in the house, being socially isolated, think of little kids whose parents are essential workers, and without them, nothing could happen. Many of them working in nursing homes and other care facilities where they are likely, more likely than the rest of us, to end up as carriers of the virus and to bring it back home. Our lives matter, and without us, as was the case in slavery, much of the foundational work required to keep this economy going would not be. So
Senator,
they do matter.
Senator Kelly, thank you for that. That's a good transition. And also you point out the challenge and difficulty that we as legislators have. A lot of the things that you faced and many of us continue to face were laws that were created by people who were sitting in the seats that we now occupy, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago. And so we're part of an institution that some may think is part of the problem. But I want to transition and pivot off of your focus on healthcare and mental health, and let's start to really dive into that. A recent study has found that, and we knew this, that non-white communities and counties have higher incidences of death. We're talking about COVID, of course, compared to white counties. And that's true, actually, both at low income and high income. So poverty alone doesn't explain the difference there. So this article, this recent study published in the medical journal suggests that racial disparities exist beyond those that are just explained by income. And so, again, the burden, non-white communities are bearing the burden of the virus, and up to 3 times more likely. So let's talk about that. Senator Pena, Delegate Pena-Melnick and Senator Kelly, explain or talk about some of the reasons why. And we can put it in the context of general racial disparities, but at the end of the day, being a person of color is bad for your health.
Absolutely, because things are so unrepresented, and Black lives do so much of the foundational work to lift up the rest of the economy, and they aren't seen as people who can transition to jobs where they are the managers and the thinkers, but they are able to do those things. And it must be so frustrating, as it was when I was a young woman, to know that people don't see you as in certain roles, that you aren't going to be represented in numbers that make sense, in places where your intellect is valued, where your particular lived life experience is valued, and where people can see you as something other than the worker bee pushing the broom.
Yes, Pena-Melnick.
Thank you so much, Senator. I agree with the senator. You know, we people of color are not valued equally with our white counterparts. And that's just it. The data does not lie. Black women, for example, you know, they're up to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related complications than white women. Black men are more than twice as likely to be killed by police as white men. The average life expectancy of an African-American person is 4 years lower than that in the rest of America. So the data does not lie. The data shows clearly that there are inequities, that we have disparities. And, you know, Dr. George Benjamin said that we do know that health inequities at their very core are due to racism. And racism is a driving force of the social determinants of health that Senator Kelly just described. And that's the problem. We did not start on an equal footing. It goes back to what Delegate Washington said, back to slavery. We cannot, you know, catch up. We have institutional racism. We have generational poverty. It is very difficult when we're not equal.
So let's focus on our legislature in Maryland. So again, both of you have been in the legislature for a number of years. Can we get specific around what opportunities have there been and what opportunities have been missed or have missed the mark?
So this session, I put in a bill this past session, which you all voted for it and supported, and leadership supported greatly, which actually require implicit bias training for healthcare providers when dealing with pregnant women. So if you touch a pregnant woman of color, you know, you must have the training. I brought the hospitals, the doctors to the table, and they actually eventually ended up supporting it because they have to pay for it, right? They have to create the curriculum. So you do need the training because a lot of doctors, for example, will see a Black woman and they will treat her and they will not take seriously, you know, the symptoms, what they're feeling. They do not understand how they live. And you need to really be culturally sensitive. So we, the legislature, decided that it was important enough to require implicit bias training. So we have also passed legislation dealing with illnesses that affect us greatly, right? Like diabetes, hypertension, right? Where we see the inequity. So the legislature, we have in the House a minority, which I chair, the Public Health and Minority Health Disparity Committee, and that is our focus. And I know I work closely with Senator Kelly as well. and we crossed a lot of those bills.
Great. Senator Pinsky, you're the chair of the Education, Health, and the Environment Committee. Could you comment on the public health and specifically around opportunities maybe in the area of environmental justice, in the area of public health and education? What do you see?
Well, that's a big question, Mary. Look, first of all, I think in terms of healthcare in general, we have to ensure that there's healthcare for all. I happen to be someone who thinks there should be a single payer system. Medicare works. I don't think we should have all the obstacles we now have for people. Obamacare is a good start, but it costs people. So I think we have a lot more steps to go. Look, environmental justice, and you serve on the same committee with me, has been forgotten. It has been sort of shunned aside. People put a new factory or a new energy plant. Everyone cheers. We have jobs. We have new employment. But they don't look at the secondary factors of the effect it has on the people in the community nearby. So it has been sort of pushed off as a second-class issue. And I think in somewhat it's symptomatic of African Americans being treated as second-class citizens, because a lot of it happens in Baltimore County suburbs, and in the city and on the edge of the city where a lot of the coal-fired power plants have been. So I think it is an issue. We've gotten brushed off by the Department of the Environment. It's not a high priority for the Hogan administration. And it has to be integrated. It has to be built in with any initiative. I think we have to use the lens of race in all public policy, whether it's environmental, public health, or education. We can't just look at things in isolation. And I think that's what's happened for a long time, even pre-Hogan. So it's an issue that comes up. They say, oh, it's difficult, it's too costly, we have to do studies. And we've had clear problems overcoming those obstacles, to be honest with you. We haven't always been successful in legislation. Everyone jumps to the beat of the economy in the private sector. And that's usually what's driven a lot of the politics across our state and in Annapolis, to be frank. And because of the importance of the economy and job creation, other things get pushed to the back burner. And I think we just can't allow that to happen.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, you chair the committee that regulates insurance, often hospital issues, long-term care issues. What are some of the main issues, both in the area of public health and mental health, you see that are facing specifically Black and Brown communities?
Well, let me say this. We actually are supposed to do child welfare as well as senior issues. And in all regard, when we look at Black and Brown populations from old age to infancy, you will see that we're overlooked in terms of provisions being made for our health, our ability to be insured, the ability of our children to see themselves as functioning, respected adults one day who ought to be on a straight trajectory to something positive. And if you think of it, even in our schools, they tend to be seen as always special ed. We certainly need that, but that's a problem. We have worked so hard and have gotten a few things done that we're proud of, but there's so much more that needs to be done. For example, I'm reading every quarter and have for about 10 years now, the reports of the Juvenile Justice Monitor, who is located in the Office of the Attorney General. And Black children, especially young Black boys, are so overly represented in juvenile justice. They are seen easily as a problem in our community schools. And instead of having social workers and welfare workers or guidance counselors working with them because their lives are harder. For example, a kid living in Baltimore City doesn't get on a school bus to come to school. They walk often 8 or 9 blocks to a bus stop. a public bus stop. They stand in the cold, the rain, the snow. They get off, they transfer to another, and so on. So their lives are not the same. Right now, if we were to open school actually and not virtually within the next few weeks, those children would have to be on the same MTA bus with the essential workers. So if COVID is a problem for the workers who are likely to carry it home, it certainly would be a problem for those kids. And so there's a lot. Juvenile justice education in Maryland is a joke, and it should not be. So
That's a perfect, oh, sorry. That's a
something
perfect.
that I have been working on for 7 or 8 years has not yet come to fruition. We need a system where the teachers for those kids don't earn less, as they now do, than the teachers who deal with other kids in the county schools, and that people can see possibilities and help them to understand they can go to the White House, that they are not something that's a has-been.
And that's a perfect transition to education, because certainly we can all agree that the coronavirus pandemic is exacerbating existing racial and ethnic disparities, and certainly a structural racism critique is needed and has been levied against our public educational system and our public policy. So let's explore and talk about the ways structural racism that's in our current public educational systems, and frankly, in some of our public policy. So we passed the landmark legislation, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. At full implementation, the blueprint would have spent $4 billion annually to make improvements to public schools, expanded pre-K, career and technical education, increased teachers' pay, address inequities, and in areas of concentrated poverty. The bill's been vetoed, right? So we all say this is a good bill, but let's focus very specifically. And I'm going to go to first Delegate Washington, and then of course Senator Pinsky. Specifically, how does the blueprint, or how did the blueprint propose to create better educational outcomes for Black and Brown students?
Thanks for that, Senator Washington. It's actually $4 billion additional dollars in education at year 10. So we're talking about a historic amount of funding being placed in our school system. And one of the big things that this state has done that has hurt the Black community is underfund schools. And so this would make sure that we finally fund schools at the highest level based on a plan, not just a bill, an actual plan that was established for the next 10 years that we worked on as a Kerwin Commission member myself. We worked on together to ensure that there's more opportunities for our young Black and Brown students. So we wanted to make sure, as you mentioned, we had to expand pre-K. We had to make sure that we provide community schools. Community schools provide those wraparound resources that families need, like healthcare, like mental health awareness, like tutoring, extended class time. Those things are all important, so important for our students of color that aren't getting the attention that they need. And so those are some of the things that we made sure we had in there. And the one thing we did add in there was a CTE program, so that students don't actually only see college as an opportunity, but be able to get those actual certifications so they can go into the workforce as soon as they graduate. And so one of the main things and central points that I made sure that I worked on as one of only 3 members of the 25-member Kerwin Commission, I was one of 3 Black people on that commission, that we made sure that we found ways to attract Black teachers to the teaching profession. That is so critical to Black students and Brown students, to have someone that looks like them, as Senator Kelly mentioned, has someone that looks like them. You know, for me growing up in Prince George's County Public Schools, I can tell you I only had 1 Black male teacher growing up. And I went from 2nd grade to 12th grade, and I actually took 2nd grade twice. So, but at one time, only 1 Black male teacher. And that's just ridiculous. So this bill and this plan would help attract more Black teachers to the teaching profession. That is profoundly, because if you look at the system right now, our system is about 38% Black of students, we only have about 20% of the faculty are Black teachers. And so we have to change that disparity in order to inspire our students, so students are able to have someone that they can connect with.
Senator Pinsky.
Well, Delegate Washington covered a lot of the things, and he played a very important role on the commission. He mentioned a number of the issues, but in terms of coming up with a new financing strategy, we also came up with a new term of art, concentrated poverty. You know, a school that has 50% of the school body, say an elementary school, with children in poverty is different than a school that has 98%. And when you have such concentrated poverty, it adds additional elements to the challenges that those children face. So we added a part of the formula was concentrated poverty. So those schools that had, say, over 70% of people on free and reduced lunch would get an extra amount of money for certain strategies. And one of the strategies, to be frank, was tutoring, either one-on-one or one-on-three, to make sure all students, particularly those low income and in concentrated poverty in Baltimore, Prince George's, by third grade were at reading level. Because you can write the script on this. A kid will fall behind, they'll get alienated, and they'll start to act out. And I think if we leave that to happen, it just reinforces the school to prison pipeline, that we've seen for so long. If we don't have the right interventions that are proven, that are scientifically based. And the idea of having a tutor program, particularly extra money in areas of concentrated poverty, to make sure those kids don't fall behind, aren't left behind. Another thing that Delegate Washington worked on were the teacher preparation strategies. We sort of have to retrain the people going into education. We have to make sure they understand cultural competency and restorative practices. So part of our work in developing the Kirwan Commission was to try as much as possible, we didn't always succeed, was to use that lens of poverty and race and African Americans and Latinx to put in place the kind of programs that they're going to benefit from. A lot of people in the dominant society, white middle class, they have a lot of cultural opportunities. They have financial support in the home. They have the computers and the Wi-Fi. And we have to do whatever we can to give those same opportunities to all students, particularly African-American students across our state.
Great. So Delegate Washington, so over the years, you've pointed out and you've worked on, and I want to get to the sort of structural racist aspects of our current educational system. And so could you talk about some of those things? I know one of the things you've worked on is disparate, well, you mentioned repeating second grade, but disparate promotion policies, disparate discipline policies. Could you focus on that and talk a little bit about that as one of the obstacles to closing the racial achievement gap?
Sure. Yeah. Look, this state has followed the country's history in being systemically racist in education. It's just not criminal justice. It's just not policing. It is actual education that has held Black people back for such a long time, not having access to adequate, high quality education and being underfunded schools for such a long time. But this one thing that Senator Pinsky mentioned that I've been working on for such a long time is this school to prison pipeline. I have not, it's just ridiculous that you can see a kid go home, get suspended one day, go home, and then stay home by themselves while their parents are away, and then get involved in something else, and then end up in our juvenile system, and then end up in our prison system as an adult. And that's happened so many different times. And so when we see things like the suspension rate, like we have a 60% suspension rate for African Americans, when we are only 30% of the student population, that just exacerbates the issue of systemic racism. When we still are arresting in 2017, arresting 2,100 students in our public school system, and 66% of them are Black students, we are adding to the school to prison pipeline and systemic racism. This has been occurring for such a long time, and these are things that I've been working on by collecting more data, access to data. I can't tell you how many times MSDE or some bills that I've proposed in the General Assembly has stalled in certain places for the last 2 to 3 years, even as Black Lives Matter movement is going on now. These bills have been held up. And so until people wake up to these circumstances, until these circumstances of black kids that are happening in our schools right now, our kids are going to continue to be held back, no matter how much funding you give them. You have to make sure it's equal and just for all students.
Thank you. This is a perfect transition about identifying structural racism in education and talking about the school to prison pipeline and the ways in which our system contributes to that, to our correctional and our criminal justice system. So Delegate Atterbury and Senator Smith, could you talk a minute about, or just reflect on or continue this conversation about the role of the school to prison pipeline, or your thoughts on the intersections of education and criminal justice? Delegate Atterbury, you could start.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I agree with everything that my colleague, Delegate Washington, said from the House and what Senator Penske said. We deal a lot with juvenile justice issues in our committee, and Senator Dolores Kelly mentioned that, and I know she's done work because I know the bills have come across and we've seen them about the education of the juveniles. And look, the only way that we are going to elevate people out of a life of crime or out of a life of systemic poverty is to educate them. That's just the bottom line, and to give people options. And so, you know, I'm a firm believer that we have to invest in these ideas, and we have to make a commitment to invest in these ideas. And that has to be the policy of the state. We have to invest in our juveniles. We have to say, this is what we're going to do, just like with the blueprint. And which the governor vetoed. You know, we have to make a conscious decision to say, look, we're going to invest in re-entry programs for juveniles who are coming out, and apprenticeship programs. We have to make a commitment in the business community to say we're going to accept these folks into the workplace and give them opportunities. The governor also vetoed 3 other bills that would have dealt with confidentiality of juvenile records, that would have given them place less of a burden on them and given them more opportunities. And he did that with other individuals related to expungement. So we have to say, you know, look, we as Democrats and we as a society, we place a value on investing in people and not necessarily investing money into corrections and building a juvenile prison, which is what the governor wanted to do, instead of, you know, building the red line in Baltimore and giving people opportunities. We have to say we're going to invest in people. We know that mass incarceration did not work. All it did was put more brown and black people in prison, and Maryland, to be as progressive as it is, has the highest rate of brown and black incarcerated people, I believe. So we have to fix this. I know that, Madam Moderator, you kind of touched on somebody's in the comments here talking about, you know, politicians and we've made these decisions. Well, no, we were not in these seats when these policies were made. We're trying to undo these decisions, and we have a governor who is trying to keep these decisions in place, and who you know, in his decision, if you haven't taken a look at that opinion in Politico, everyone needs to take a good read at it. It's a really good description of how his one decision to not invest in the red line just takes a whole segment of society, and just continues systemic racism. And just continues it. So I think those are my comments. And I think as Democrats, we've made a decision to invest in people, and we need a governor and a president to do the same.
Absolutely. Senator Smith.
Thanks, Senator Washington. And I thought that, I mean, when I saw the agenda for the panel, I thought it was a perfect way to kind of encapsulate, and having us go last is actually a perfect way to kind of talk about these issues, because it does tease out the intersectionality of mental health, healthcare, education. And by the time the issues that Delegate Atterbury and I deal with get to our committee, we're really dealing at the tail end. We're dealing at things that people are already enmeshed in the criminal justice system, and in many cases have been for years. And so when you're talking about education and investments in jobs and transportation and healthcare, that's the pre, and we always get the ex post. And so I think that's a really important part of that conversation. And Delegate Atterbury is right, and Delegate Washington is right. I've admired his work with the school to prison pipeline for a long time. And I had an opportunity to work with him and Delegate Brooke Learman for preschoolers. So from pre-K suspensions all the way to high school, African Americans and children with disabilities are suspended at disproportionate rates. And that has a cascading and long-lasting effect with the entanglements in terms of criminal justice, and then also having parents having to take off time from work. And so you can see where we're going here. There's a cascading effect with those disparate decisions that our teachers and our society is making in terms of not understanding those decisions when you're suspending Black and brown students at a higher rate. I'll say this though, with respect to a lot of the criminal justice and the juvenile justice issues, and Senator Kelly has worked on this issue and she's been in my committee a lot over the years. We are not doing an adequate enough job teaching the folks that are incarcerated, and we are not doing an adequate enough job preparing folks to come out. And so when Delegate Atterbury talks about the list of things that we passed this year, we passed at least 12 expungement bills that would have given people a second chance and an opportunity to reintegrate into society. Those were all vetoed. And so when you hear those narratives and you start reading those articles about pulling funding for Kerwin, pulling funding for investments in transportation infrastructure, pulling funding for training and assistance, vetoing legislation that allows folks to reintegrate into society. These are all part of a broader picture that I'm glad that we're having that discussion. And I think it's a well-rounded discussion that we're having, because one piece cannot be worked on without the other. And I'm excited about the new energy. And I'm excited about the opportunity to get a new governor in office. And in 95 days, we've got an opportunity to put a new president in office. And so it starts here and starts with us. And I'm glad that we can start having some frank discussions and energize our base and make some change. So thank you for having us and sparking that discussion. It's really
absolutely. And what you're talking about, what you both are talking about, is what does meaningful reform look like, particularly in this political climate, right? And so in answering that, talk a little bit about the language that we're using, and also, for example, defund the police approach. Could we just talk about what meaningful reform might look like? What's the challenges in the political opportunities in the political climate, and let's talk about defund the police.
Sure, and I think that this is a great discussion too, because there's a part for us to kind of have some recompense as well within our party, and I'm certainly part of it. I've written about it in my letter on the 4th, and then even in interviews after subsequent interviews about this issue. In 2015, after the uprising of Freddie Gray, we did have the House. I was part of it. We had a work group to work on the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights and a number of different reforms. Since then, we've passed. I did an account. We've passed 21 reforms in the legislature, and they've all been very good. But obviously, all of us here can agree that we didn't go far enough, and I was certainly part of that. And I didn't advocate strongly enough. Then I was a freshman delegate. Now I'm chair of a committee in the Senate, and have an opportunity to make some real change. And so the way that we talk about things has to start with kind of reflecting and digging deep within the party and within ourselves to realize, what we could have done earlier, why we didn't do it, and how we can course correct in the future. Part of that discussion is the rhetoric that we use. Obviously, the tensions have been very hot. My approach is that when the tensions are hot, you've got the rhetoric and your head has got to be cool. And so with respect to the defund the police movement, I respect the movement. And I understand that it exists on a continuum. Me personally, I have refrained from using that rhetoric because I think that it can be weaponized against us by our adversaries, by folks that are looking to put Trump back into office and to bolster and push up Republican candidates that will most assuredly use that in campaign rhetoric this next election cycle. So I've refrained from using it, but I do understand and I appreciate and I fully support the underlying sentiment, which is reinvestment in communities and reallocation and a reimagining of how we police. But it's also an acknowledgement that, look, just as a law enforcement officer is not the right person to respond to someone suffering from a mental health crisis, so too a social worker is not the right person to respond to someone breaking into your house. So we have a real opportunity to reimagine things and to reinvest and take a proactive approach. And so it's my hope that in this moment that we have the ideas that have been before us. We have a well-defined problem. What we've lacked is the political will. And my hope is that we sustain that will carrying into the session, whenever it is we reconvene, to make sure that we carry the necessary broad-based systemic reforms that we need across the line this time around. And I certainly look to do my part.
Delegate Atterbury.
Thank you. So I agree. I served on that police accountability work group in 2016 with then delegate Smith, who was in the House at the time, and we were both newbies. And now I am in a different position as vice chair of the committee and chair of the House's police accountability and reform work group. And, you know, I agree. I think we did do some good things back then, but we need to do things that have teeth and that are bold and that are a huge step forward. So we need to do significant change. This is our moment in time, period. And what we do is going to have a lasting effect for Brown and Black people in the state of Maryland. And I'm invested in that because of my children and because of all of the other children of color in our state. I don't use the terms of art that are created by activists. I recently, one day during this pandemic, you know, all the days are running together, but I listened to a town hall that President Obama did on policing. And he said, look, you know, and he was talking about when he was in the state Senate in Chicago. And he said, look, we need activists to bring attention to the issue, and we need policymakers. And, you know, I'm very focused on being a policymaker. I understand that the term defund the police brought this issue to light and it is part of this movement, but it has different meaning to different people. And like Chair Smith said, you know, we do need people to respond to that individual who has, you know, perhaps molested a child or who has committed arson. But do we need to reinvest in programs? And this goes back to the previous conversation we had. Does there need to be a reallocation of monies to invest in people, as I mentioned before, and not in the correction system? Absolutely. We need to, as I mentioned before, invest in our juveniles. We need to invest in reentry programs and into mental health. So we need to take a look at those funds and do exactly that. So to me, that's what defund the police means.
So now we're going to do a kind of a round robin wrap up. This is great. So this question now is for all of you, and just thinking about where do we go from here, and please feel free to be intersectional and combine or whatever your thoughts. And we're going to do this for about 5 minutes or so. But I'll start with Delegate Pena Melnick. If you can sort of go on from here, where do we go?
I think that, you know, as legislators, we need to maintain the spotlight on these issues. You know, we in America tend to have a very short-term memory, okay? And we need to have a long-term memory regarding all these issues. I think as a Black and Latina legislator, the Black caucus has a role here, the Latino caucus has a role here. We have to work with our friends to educate them on these issues, to make sure that they understand when the fiscal policies presented to us, and we have a great bill that is going to provide more money for mental health, that is going to provide more providers as well, more services and support, you know, forget the money that is going to cost. We need to, as we used to have a colleague, I don't know if you remember, Delegate Hubbard used to say that the money should follow the policy, not the policy should follow the money. And I think that oftentimes when we see that fiscal note, we don't get it done because it's expensive. And I think that regarding these issues right here that we're discussing tonight, you either pay now or you pay later. It is worth the you know, the investment. We need to do some strategic thinking. We need to have long-term vision and the political will. We have to allocate money to these policies. We can't just pass resolutions. They're fine, they're wonderful, but we need to have some meat and some money behind them. And we need to keep the pressure on our colleagues.
Delegate Washington, quickly, and then Senator Kelly.
You're muted.
Can't hear you.
Here I am. Sorry about that. You would have thought I would know how to use this thing,
You
right?
lost 20 seconds. Keep
Yeah,
going.
got it. Okay, look, I wanted to read this quote from this Black woman, Miss Taylor. She's a contributor writer for the New York Times. She says, "Young Black people have exploded in rebellion over the grotesque killing of George Floyd. We are now witnessing the broadest protest movement in American history, and yet the response of Black elected officials has been cautious and uninspired. And I take that to heart because those people are out there working, they're activists that are out there doing the work on the ground. And it's us that our feet must be held to the fire to ensure that we eradicate systemic racism in all sectors, not just criminal justice, healthcare, insurance, education. We need a real racial equity program for the state of Maryland. That's what we need to invest in right now in order to make a real change. That's where we go next. That's what we need to implement in the next legislative session.
Absolutely. Senator Pinsky.
Yeah, the theme from Delegate Pena-Melnick to Delegate Washington to Senator Smith has been about, are we going to be proactive or are we going to be reactive? And unfortunately, we've been reactive. And unless we put the money up front, whether it's for education to reduce the look, if we invest in education as we should, we'll have many fewer people in prisons. We don't have to invest that money. We won't, if we invest money in early education, we won't have the discipline problems. I mean, this goes across the sections. Unfortunately, to get the money up front, it means raising revenue. And there's been a strong resistance to redistributing money, of taxing the wealthy, of taxing the corporations, and use it to help the underfunded, whether it's schools, healthcare, housing, joblessness. And that's been an obstacle. And if we keep waiting to react, we're going to continue to have situations where people of color are going to be second-class citizens. I mean, we have to make the commitment up front and put the money where our mouth is. And it might make some people uncomfortable. There's been a broad feeling, even among Democrats, of not raising revenue. Now, it shouldn't fall on the backs of working and poor people. It means some redistribution. But until we do that, we're going to continue to face all these problems across all of these areas.
Thank you. And Senator Kelly.
Yes, it occurs to me that the current movement of young people who are in the street working hard to bring attention to injustice and lack of representativeness is very important. But what they're lacking is something that some of us could help with. And that is, they don't understand the psychology and the linguistics of revolution. They don't understand the resistance and where it all is going to come from. And if you remember some decades ago, when we were at a point somewhat similar to this one, and people were riled up and saying, we aren't going to take it anymore, that someone came up with a slogan, and the label was "Burn, Baby, Burn." That had the negative impact on all kinds of people, some Black and kind of sophisticated, they thought, intellectuals, people of other races, people of various professions who said this is a pile of rebels. They began to lose sight of what the goal was and of the underlying problems that need to be solved. And they focused on that burn, baby, burn. That is functioning right now the way that Defund the Police is functioning. We need to get some of these important young student leaders and talk with them about the linguistics and how they could add to their momentum by changing some of the linguistics. We ought to be focusing on transparency, retraining the police, holding them accountable. We can come up with the right label, but this one that they have come up with is hurting their cause. The cause is just, and we ought not let it go down because of a wrong label.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. So I'm getting the signal. We're going to transition to the curated question portions, and I promise that everyone will get an opportunity to participate on this. So Jamie, could you tell us what are some questions that I could start off with, and we'll just, yeah.
Sure thing. So we've got a lot of great questions. We're going to do our best to get to some of them. I'm going to try and pick out a couple for topics that we haven't necessarily touched on yet. First one is from Susan Allen. Rental evictions threaten many Maryland families of color. These evictions impact the education of children in our health system as it fights COVID-19. How will you challenge the governor's limited eviction protection to people who can prove COVID-19 cut their earnings?
Senator Smith, could you address that? And I'll have Delegate Atterbury, and then anybody else can jump in.
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. So earlier in the summer, I commissioned a committee to dive into this issue, develop a set of recommendations. Senator Shelley Heddleman led that group, and she produced a fantastic report, which is on the MGA website, and a couple articles surfacing around, but I can definitely send it to you afterwards. It contains 12 recommendations from everything from suggesting we extend those protections of non-evictions and cutting off utilities, Wi-Fi and the like, to protecting people on the consumer side, so that when the courts start to open up in August, when those eviction hearings start happening again, there's a level of protection for folks that even have a filing against them, because we know that can have a negative impact on their future ability to gain housing. So everything in between, from consumer side to legal services, legal representation for folks that in eviction cases that the state should support. But the question is, how can we hold the governor to account? And so that's the tough part. There are two ways. I mean, we're not in session right now. So we have to be in session to take action, and that we can do that through legislation. We can also do that through public pressure. But the short answer is we can't act unless we are convened, and we can do that legislatively, and we will do it legislatively whenever it is safe for us to go back and when we have whatever it is when we reconvene. But in the interim, it's important to highlight that the governor can take some of those steps, and we're not counting on him to do it. But we know that he can take a lot of these steps, almost all of these steps, all the recommendations that are contained here, the governor can do something about to provide a modicum of relief for the hundreds of thousands of Marylanders who are facing a cliff of eviction, and the close to 1 million Marylanders, or actually it's over 1 million Marylanders who have applied for uninsurance, for employment insurance, so unemployment insurance. So there are a lot of things we can do. The tough part is that in being a part-time legislature, we can't do it. But what we've done is developed a roadmap of ideas that we can and will implement when we're back in session.
Delegate Atterbury, do you have a?
I don't have much to add to that, because like Senator Smith said, we are not in session. The House does have a work group working on this issue led by Chairman Barve. So I'm not going to speak directly to that. While we are out of session, just locally, I spoke to the United Way this morning on what they are doing locally in my county. I know they're in a lot of other counties and in the city dealing specifically with this issue of eviction, and monies that they have and programs to help and caseworkers to help individuals. I'm in touch with our county folks here locally, at the judicial level, at the county executive level, at the county council level. We all stay in touch to make sure we can help folks best that we can here at the county level.
Thanks. Jamie, next question.
All right. So obviously our conversation so far is focused on the legislature. We have a question from Jordan Harberger. What role do you see for county councils in passing legislation in their jurisdictions to address police accountability and safety of Black lives as they interact with law enforcement officers and the criminal justice system they govern?
Okay, so who would like to take that? Jump in.
I can.
All right, great.
I can take it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, or moderator. Just so used to saying that word. Look, at the county level, I serve as the co-chair of the Prince George's County Police Reform Work Group. And so Prince George's County has a history of racism within its police department, but within and how its police department has implemented policies, even outside with this, with the public, and so many different use of force cases that have occurred. So I'm looking forward to diving deep into these policies of hiring, training, use of force policies. I'm taking a step from my mentor, Vanessa Atterbury, who's the chair of the state work group, who's helped me as I guide this policy. So at the local level, there's a way for us to really focus on those issues at the ground level, and especially with the union contracts and looking at that budget too. And I encourage everyone to look at the budget, because those budgets are hefty. They're the second largest right after the school system of those local jurisdictions. So we're going to take a look at the budgets and see what we can do to make sure we are more efficient and effective force, and make sure they abide by the rules and laws and are held accountable, and it's more transparency within the county police department.
And if I may, I would say thank you, Senator. the saying that all politics, are local, right? The police departments have a lot of flexibility to change a lot of their internal rules and regulations. And Alonso and Senator Pinsky, that we have been very active in Prince George's County, and especially in the last few years regarding a lot of those policies that affect certain communities like the Black and Latino community. And we have been instrumental in making sure that they're respected and that some of those policies change. For example, one of those was, there was a policy that basically the police will stop a person if they were undocumented, and it was not, there wasn't a warrant for their arrest. It was just a basic, simple traffic stop. They had basically a rule that they will call ICE. And have the person wait there for ICE for a simple traffic infraction. So we were instrumental in changing that rule, where now the policy under Angela Alsobrooks is that you will not call ICE when you have an undocumented individual for a simple traffic stop, because those people, we live here in this community, those individuals, human beings, work, they live here, this is their home, they have kids. So of course we can change local policy. It's not just at the state level. And it's really important to be active and be involved and go to those meetings.
Great. Okay, next question, Jamie.
All right, so this next question is from Cheryl Denby. Regarding policing, we need legislation to rid police ranks of abusive officers and hold them accountable. What is being done in Maryland to make the police personally responsible for any civil lawsuits versus taxpayers having to pay for the police's bad behavior?
Okay, I'm assuming that's either Atterbury or Smith, or both.
I'll go. Do you want me to go, Vanessa? Till I get it right. I got it. All right. Good question. So obviously you've got the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, and there's a lot of discussion over that. That's a statewide policy, part of our statute. And there's a movement afoot. You've heard a lot of the rhetoric talk about repeal or work within the statute to completely revise it, or repeal and replace. My stance on this has been repeal and replace. And I hate, I like the phrase sounds great, but I hate what it engenders on the national level with Obamacare. But you have to understand that we have 148 law enforcement agencies across the state. And if you just repealed the LEOBR, you would then, the default position would be to go to all those 148 different departments to have their own different policies for discipline and due process. And that would ignore, if you're looking to make reform, to folks that are doing those union negotiations and contracts all throughout the state. You're going to put more pressure on your mayors and your county executives that are going to have to figure out when those renegotiations start happening, what are you going to negotiate for? In this economically austere time, you're not going to negotiate for raises. You're going to negotiate for more due process. That, unfortunately, was what happened in Montgomery County. And so it's important for the LEOBR, if you're looking at it, you have that conversation, yes, repeal, but then finish the sentence. The hard work is, what are you going to rebuild back with? And that's where the real hard work of this, the House committee and the Senate are going to have to come together and figure that out, because I think that's where the movement's going. So I just want to say that, make sure that you kind of complete the sentence when you talk about that. Second, what you're squinting toward is like the Local Tort Claims Act. And maybe you're even talking about some 1983 claims, which are federal claims for civil rights violations. So look, with respect to all the departments except for Baltimore City, which is a state entity technically, although their council and their mayor have full control over the budget and the hiring and firing of the chief, all those jurisdictions are subject to the Local Tort Claims Act, which, in most instances is going to be up to $450,000. I think we moved that up a couple years ago, but you're right. That's that comes out of the taxpayer dollar. And it's a limit. It's a small limit for police misconduct or abuse like that. So if you're a plaintiff, you have an option to go federal or state. Right now, we're looking at everything. We're looking at tort reform. We're looking at insurance schemes to change and how local jurisdictions are underwriting their insurance policies to incentivize good behavior and to hold people accountable at the local level. Everything from that to LEOBR to use of force standards. We're looking at everything. And so the short answer is that there's some tort things we can do, and there's some personal liability things you can do. But these are difficult things that are going to engender opposition from multiple fronts. what I've started to realize is that from state's attorneys to unions to chiefs to mayors and county executives, everyone's got a little bit of opposition to the reforms that I think are necessary as we move forward. And that's why I keep talking about the political will necessary to get through this maze as we move forward, to take some of those, to make some of those really tough decisions. And that tort reform is certainly one of those things that are going to be challenging.
As Jamie looks for the next one, Senator Kelly, I just wanted to read this, not just to Senator Kelly, but all of us. One of the comments in the chat is from Asia. Hi, I'm a 16-year-old Baltimore City student. I just wanted to say thank you. This helped and inspired me a lot because I'm doing my own town hall. This meeting and you guys' dedication helped me because I'm a youth who's fighting for change myself. And she gives her email and reach out to me. So she's taking you up on it. And so again, I think this is a real opportunity for us to build a kind of intergenerational experience. And as Democrats, understanding that there are those of us, we need change. We want to reject, we want to push back what the past, we don't want to repeat the promises and the problems of the past, but there's a real opportunity to learn there. And I'm glad that Asia is going to take Senator Kelly up on that. So Jamie, what do we have next?
All right, so the next one I have for you is from Lisa Shore. How can citizens help choose responsive and inclusive police chiefs? We might have an opportunity to do this in Anne Arundel County and need to be prepared with examples and ideas.
I'll hop in here. In our county, I think as most people know, our chief of police resigned a month or so ago. And our county executive is issuing a survey right now that our residents can fill out. And so I think that I think in order to do this for any of these large departments or departments within the county, it should be transparent. It should be community led. It should have some community input into the process for these very large systems like our school system or like the police department. So I think she's doing just that. So it's a great first start to do a survey. I would like to, we did a listening session last week of the Prince George's County Police Work Group. And so we did hear some insights from folks of what they want to hear for the next police chief. And so those are the types of things I think that that county executives should do as they hire the next police chief moving forward. And you should require your county executive works for you. All right, they work for you. All right? You need to hold them accountable for making sure you have your input into that process, because they all work for you.
I have another question from the chat, and I'm going to direct this to Senator Pinsky and then anybody else. As important as education is, isn't it also important for parents of students to also have support so they can help their children at home? How do we invest in the community so that kids don't have to worry about taking care of themselves or their siblings or being homeless or hungry? Also, I'd want Senator Kelly to follow up after Senator Pinsky. So Senator Pinsky.
No, it's absolutely a problem. And we see what's happening at the national level where they're talking about reducing the unemployment stimulus from $600 to $200. And I think this gets to the issue of the fundamental things that prop up and form systemic racism. I mean, if people don't have decent jobs that pay well, we're going to continue to have this problem. And Senator Kelly said it earlier, a lot of the frontline workers are Black and brown. You know, a lot of middle class, particularly white, work from home on their computer. But a lot of people who are clerks or LPNs or custodians at hospitals and other locations are people of color, you know, and they are not getting the salary. They don't have the opportunities and the flexibility a lot of other people have. So, you know, I hate to take this to 30,000 feet, but we have to have a jobs program where people are paid a decent, honorable salary. You know, they did that in the 30s under Roosevelt. You know, workers project administration, PA. They did it for artists. They did it for a lot of people. I mean, we need a radical transformation. Now, some can be done at the state level, but we're also limited. Some of it has to be federal, and that's why we have to get this idiot out of the White House. But again, just getting someone else in without the right programs isn't the answer either. We've got to keep pushing and pressing and have a grassroots movement that talks for fundamental transformation, that we have a change in jobs, that we have quality jobs. And if we have to create them by government, we do that. and as well as housing and employment and a lot of other things. So, it's a big question, and it's a fair concern that it's beyond just schools, because what does a parent do?
And Senator Kelly, I'm going to have you have the last word in this section. I don't want to be pulled off by our chair.
Sure. I would just say that what the Democratic Party is about comes in right here. After all, we all have a vote. But right now, we're about to approach, it appears, a very structurally defective election, given what the governor has given us as his edict. We should all be pushing back. We don't have but so much time to push, and if our pushing isn't sufficient, then our secondary job is to make sure that everybody understands the absentee ballot process that we're going to have to, if his mess holds up, first indicate that you want a ballot. Some people are trying to write their own letters in now. We aren't sure that's the protocol that will even be accepted. So very soon, if that's going to happen, we need to know if it's possible to draft as communities of interest our own model letter so people could get started, and to help them remember that this time, contrary to what happened in June, they would need a stamp on the letter that goes back to say that you want to vote absentee. And then you got to wait for the ballot. The governor is not simplifying anything, add an additional at least 5 million more just for the ballots and the application process. We will have a more messy outcome. We had the best turnout we've had in the state of Maryland. And it was a situation, a new model that we hadn't tried before. So there were some rough spots. Why would you now, a few months later, go to a completely additional or different new model and expect to get better results when people who are afraid of COVID and should be are expected to go to about 1,600 or more polling places and stand in line, and people who are 65 and older who've been election judges are expected to maybe give up their lives to give us the infrastructure. We should all be, for a couple of weeks, beating on the governor while there's time to change contracts and to make this election right. And if not, then our job is to make sure, whatever the system is, that everybody in our communities and in all of our precincts are helped to meet the requirements so that the turnout will be in our favor. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a perfect ending and a way of wrapping up about uprooting systemic racism, protecting our democracy, making sure that we're not, there's no voter suppression, focused on schools, health, and justice. It's been an honor to be your moderator. I'm going to pass it on to our chair. She's going to give some final remarks. Thank you also very much for a good discussion. I hope we get back sooner than later to start to address some of these issues, and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Senator Washington. I knew this was going to be good. I didn't know it was going to be this good. This was amazing. Thank you all so much. This is exactly the kind of energy. This is exactly the kind of information. This is what I want us to be a part of. This is what I want the Maryland Democratic Party to bring to the citizens of Maryland, to let them see all of you in action, to let them see how well we are represented in the Maryland General Assembly. And you are all shining stars. And tonight could not have gone any better. So I thank you sincerely for this. And it validates the vision that we all had when we started this process of having these discussions. And as I said at the first panel, and I'm saying it again tonight, this is a clear indication that 90 minutes is not enough. We have got to continue this dialogue. We have got to continue this interaction. And I thank all of you. And I encourage those of you that are watching tonight, reach out to these elected officials, make yourselves known, let them know, give them your ideas. And someone asked a question about selecting a police chief. When we have these community meetings and these listening sessions, go Go and hear what has to be said. I remember when we were selecting the superintendent, the CEO of schools here in Prince George's County. I went and I testified because I believed in Dr. Golson and I wanted people to hear. The room was packed and 80, 90 people signed up to speak that night. Be one of those 80 or 90 people in your community to sign up to speak and make your voices heard and make sure that people know that you are an active member of your community, engaged and involved and ready to help and to assist our elected officials. They need us as much as we need them. So this should be a partnership. And I hope that tonight shows all of you that this is a partnership that the Maryland Democratic Party takes very seriously. And you have some great, great leaders that you can reach out to at any time. So thank you all very much. So I want to say that we must remember that the most effective way that we can achieve any solutions is by exercising our right to vote. And Senator Kelly touched on that. Nothing matters if we don't vote. We can sit around and we can spend our days on social media arguing back and forth and talking in an echo chamber. That means absolutely nothing. The only thing that matters is if you show up to vote. And yes, it is fun and it's exciting to vote in the presidential elections, but the local elections, that directly impacts your life. That's where you need to be engaged and involved. That's where you need to know what the issues are so that when something happens in your community, you don't have to say, how did this happen? You know exactly how it happened, or you can say, I won't let this happen. That's what your local elections mean. And that's why you need to get involved. So when it's time to vote, don't call your neighbor and ask who you should select. Be your own education system. Educate yourself. Call you, I see you, Delegate Washington. Be your own information source. Find out what you need to find out. Be an informed voter, an educated voter, so that you know exactly what you're getting when you elect that person to represent you. We must continue to do our research, go to forums, go to town halls, debates, visit websites, familiar yourselves with people's positions so that you know exactly what is happening in your community, in your state. Becoming an informed voter is the only way the community, state, and the country we are striving for and we deserve. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This is an ongoing discussion. We will see you in September. Have a wonderful vacation. If you're taking time off, if you're spending time at home with family and friends, which we all are, enjoy that. Appreciate this time that we have together. Use this time to go to those websites and familiarize yourselves with your elected officials so that you know exactly what to do in November. Thank you all so much. See you soon.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Great job, Ms. Moderator.
Great job, everyone. Thank you.
Definitely.
We're still live.
Still live. And well, everybody needs to hear that we're congratulating each other. This was a job well done. And I really appreciate everything that you guys did tonight. This was a wonderful discussion. And yes, we're still live and I know people can still hear us. And I want people to know how grateful I am to all of you. And we will be calling on you again. The Maryland Democratic Party, we at the State Party, we need you. And we want to be the voice for what you want us to express. We want to carry the message forward for all of you so that we're working together as one party, not as individuals in a silo, in our own particular silos. We're the Maryland Democratic Party and we are stronger together. So thank you all. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Okay, and bless you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you all.
Good night, yes.